Professor Worgley's here. We were just talking about user experience, talking about selecting the first element, focusing to the first element, and scrolling back to the top. This is only going to work if you have an event listener. Okay, you'll see here which causes the listener to treat this item as being selected. Selected means the user actually selects it, meaning they actually click on it. So this is almost like a little bit of test code. If you ever thought about wondering what a tester would be like, you'd actually write code to do what the user would do and see if it pulls back the correct results. So this is thinking about user experience, but it's almost testing the code to make sure it works. That way I don't have to call the load method manually like this. This is a bad programming practice. This is a good programming practice. It's knocking out two birds with one stone. It's thinking about user experience, and it's also testing the code to make sure it works. I need to scroll to the top. Here's where all this happens. Okay, here's where that listener is. So I have the news list view. Okay, you'll see the list view is the UI element list view. Okay, so it's basically a list that the user can see. And on the list view, I get the selection model, I get the selected index property, and I add a listener to it, which means if any item is selected, this listener, this function is going to get called. Now, this is a weird function. If you remember the property change support, it also did something like this. We had the old value and the new value and the actual observable value. And you'll see this funny annotation. Okay, you'll see the diamond notation. Remember, that's for generics. Okay, that's for generics, but it's weird. It's got a question mark and it extends number. Okay, and a lot of students will say, well, why is it written this way? To be honest, that's what the developers wrote. If I do a show Java doc, you wait till the doc pops up. You'll see that's how this observable value is written. So it's an interface, and you'll see the interface has a generic value of t. And if we keep scrolling down, you'll see that's how it is. Change listener has a generic value of t, where it has a question mark, where it has the superclass of t. Okay, so actually quite a few classes can go through here. As long as the superclass is of type T, then you can pass that generic type. Okay, so this is a weird syntax, and you'll want to read more about it. This is more in the upper levels for object-oriented programming. You'll see we're using it here, but we're not going to go too much in depth what this is. You'll want to know generics for the final exam. You want to know how to pass one generic type or two generic types. What does the T mean? So you want to know some of the basic generics naming conventions, but the whole question mark with the super keyword, we're not going to go too much in depth. Okay, but you can actually read about this here. It has a little bit of the documentation to describe what that is. Now, I just pulled up a quick Stack Overflow, and usually Stack Overflow, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good, but it is good here. It's a generic method, and the whole concept is called generics in Java. We studied generics. You need to know generics for the final exam, but this is a special type of generics. You'll see that declaration means T can be any type that is a subclass of A, B, C. And you can see that here. It says extends number. So basically, any generic type that is a subclass of number will work. Okay, you'll see two numbers are passed. We have the old value and the new value, and this is for the selected index. Okay, so this is a more technical generics type. It's even more flexible than generics. It's saying any subclass that extends number. Whereas with generics before, we would say, okay, you can pass up any string or you can pass up any integer. So this is even more generic. So it's being generic for generics concepts. Now you'll see here I have an if statement. If the new value is less than 0, this could happen. In some rare cases, they may select and the index is a negative number. It shouldn't happen, but it could happen. So you want to have a check here. If it's less than 0, or if the new value is greater than the story size minus 1. Let's say by some rare chance, they select a value when it's in the middle of deleting the old ones and putting the new ones on. And for some reason, the new value is greater than the last element. Notice how we have to do a -1 here. So let's say we have 2 elements in the array list. The size will be 2. The first element will be 0. The second element will be 1. So you always have to do size -1 because we're talking about an index here. So we want to make sure the index is greater than 0 or greater than or equal to 0, or it's not past the last element in the array. If any of these conditions are true, return, meaning don't proceed because we're going to have an error. As long as it's in the range of the stories, then we can proceed. So what do we want to do? Well, I have a New York Times news story. That's the type of this class. Okay, we have it here, the New York Times news story. So we can grab the story. Okay, we'll call it story. We're going to grab the one from the element that they selected. So based off all the stories, we're going to get, and I need to cast it to an int because this is a number. Okay, this is a number. And when I call the get method for an array list, it needs an integer. So if I just put in new value here, okay, you'll see I get an error. Okay, it's trying to get a number. But if I cast it to an int, saying, hey, I know this is a number, but I promise that it can be converted to an int, you'll see this is successful. Now, a lot of interviewers don't like this because I'm doing an explicit cast. You'll see number is an object. How do I know it's an object or a class? Because it has a capital N. So it may be better to see what methods are available. Okay, so if I do new value and do the dot notation, it actually has int value. You'll see int value returns the value of that specified number as an int, which may involve rounding or truncation. So it may be better to call the method, which is what I would do in an interview. The explicit cast will work, but why not take advantage of the pre-built methods? So this will work, okay, but this is a class, this is an object. So in an interview, I recommend taking advantage of the methods. Okay, you'll see this is spelled wrong. This is New York Times news story. And once that's spelled correctly, this will work. So whenever they select something from the list view, I'm going to grab the index property of it because this is an observable array list. So the observable array list also has the index. Remember what an array is, and remember what an array list is. These are things you should know for the final exam. You'll want to know collections like array list, linked list, hash map. What's the difference between them? When would I use an array list? When would I use a linked list? When would I use a hash map? One good thing about an array list is it's similar to an array because I have the index of the element. And that's important because when I select something from the observable array list, I want to know what index it is so I can use that for my regular array list, which stores all the actual story objects. Then I can grab that story and actually display it on the screen. So I'll do web engine. I'm going to call the load method, and I can pass the stories web URL. Now, earlier, all of them were public, so I can access the field directly. But then we changed it to getters and setters, which is a better programming practice. So make sure you use the getter. And I'm going to say get the web URL. Okay, so I'm going to get the web URL. I'm going to load the story. Now, if I scroll down, we tried this before. I said web engine load, stories, get 0, and then grab the web URL. I don't need to do this anymore because I'm selecting the first element. And when I select the first element, this listener will get triggered. It'll check to make sure the index is in the right bounds. It'll grab the first news story and load it automatically. Okay, it'll load it automatically. So this takes care of it for me. If I were to say select 1 or select 2 or select 3, this would trigger the event listener and the listener would load the story for me automatically. Now this is for the listener. I also want to load some default data for the TA or the user. That way they actually see the application when they first open it up. I don't want it to be a blank app and they don't know what to do. If I put some default data in there for them, as soon as they press play, they'll see the application, they'll see the layout, they'll see how cool it is without doing minimum amount of work. Okay, so this is also thinking about user experience. So before the listener is activated, once the ready method's called, which means the app is first loaded, I'm going to say the search text field. I'm going to set the text to my default search string. What is my default search string? If I scroll up, you'll see it's University of Missouri. And then I'm going to load the news. Okay, I'm going to load the news, which is my load news method. So this is also user experience. So what you should do is load some default data. This is what I'm talking about here. Either that's data from an API or that's data that you built yourself manually. Load the default data so the TA or the grader can see what your UI looks like, but this is also a good user experience. That way the user is required to make a minimum effort to see what your app looks like, and then they learn how to interact and actually use the application. Because they'll see the search string there, and they'll see that they can modify the search string. And what's cool is it'll actually select the first story for them. So it'll load the story and they can see what the app looks like without doing anything. Okay, I'm going to show you what this looks like, and we're going to test the app in the next video. So stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.